Sometimes the people who should stand by you are the first to walk away. Sometimes the place you end up is the last place you ever expected. And sometimes buried beneath decades of dust and silence, a dead man leaves behind the kind of truth that changes everything. Nathan Cole stood in the overgrown driveway of his grandfather's house on a back road in rural Connecticut, one hand shielding his eyes from the late August sun, the other gripping the handle of a battered suitcase that held nearly everything he still owned in this world. He was 53 years old. 6 months ago, he had a wife, a home, a career, a place in the world that made sense. Now he had a suitcase and a condemned house, and the kind of silence that settles over a man when the universe has finished taking from him everything it can reach. Beside him, his daughter Lily shifted her weight from one foot to the other, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder, her face arranged in that careful blankness she had perfected in the months since her mother's death. 24 years old with her mother's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn jaw, and right now she was doing what she had done every day since the funeral. She was holding herself together so her father wouldn't have to hold her together too. The house looked worse than Nathan remembered. Far worse. It sagged in the middle like a tired old man who had given up caring about appearances a long time ago. The roof dipped where rafters had weakened shingles missing in patches that exposed dark rotting wood beneath. Windows were shattered or gone entirely covered with warped plywood that had turned the color of ash after 30 years of weather. Ivy crawled up the walls in thick ropes, swallowing entire sections of the facade, fingers of green prying into every crack in the foundation as though the earth itself was trying to pull the structure back down into the ground where it belonged. The porch steps had rotted through in places. The front door hung crooked on hinges so rusted they looked like they might crumble at a touch. 30 years since anyone had lived here. 30 years since his grandfather, Walter Cole, had died at 87, leaving the property tangled in legal complications that Nathan's father, a distant man who spent his whole life running from his own father's shadow, had never bothered to untangle. Now, through a bureaucratic twist, in a lawyer who had finally tracked Nathan down, the house belonged to him, just in time for him to have absolutely nothing else. "Well," Lily said, "it's still standing. That's something." Nathan tried to smile. The smile did not form. He kept staring at the house and thinking about how 3 months ago he had stood in the doorway of a different house, the house where he and Diane had raised their daughter, and watched sheriff's deputies supervise the removal of their furniture while neighbors pretended not to look. He thought about how small a life could become. How fast. "Come on," he said, forcing his legs to move. "Let's see what we're working with." He did not say what he was really thinking, which was that this collapsing house on a forgotten road in a town that barely existed was exactly what he deserved. A broken home for a broken man. That thought was not true. But grief has a way of making lies feel like facts, and Nathan Cole had been grieving for a very long time. The story of how they ended up here began like most tragedies with love. Diane Whitfield had been reading a book in a coffee shop in Boston 24 years earlier, when Nathan accidentally knocked her cup off the table reaching for a napkin dispenser. She looked up at him with an expression that was equal parts annoyance and amusement, and he forgot the apology he had been forming, because her eyes were the kind of eyes that rearrange a man's priorities in the space of a heartbeat. They were married 14 months later. Lily arrived 10 months after that. For 23 years, they built a life that was ordinary in all the best ways. A house in suburban Hartford, careers that paid the bills, a daughter who grew up smart and kind and fierce in the way her mother was fierce, which is to say quietly and without apology. Diane was strong. That was the word everyone used. She was the woman who never complained, never showed weakness, never admitted she was hurting. She carried burdens without mentioning them. She solved problems before anyone knew they existed. And when her body began to betray her in November of the previous year, she treated it the way she treated everything else. She handled it alone. The symptoms started small. Fatigue that didn't lift with rest. Weight loss she attributed to stress. Nathan noticed. He asked her to see a doctor. She refused. He asked again more firmly. She got angry. "I know my body, Nathan. Stop worrying." He pushed. She pushed back harder. That was Diane. You did not tell Diane Whitfield what to do. Not her husband, not her parents, not God himself. In January, she coughed blood onto her pillow and hid it from Nathan for 3 days before he found the stain while changing the sheets. He did not ask this time. He drove her to the hospital and she was too weak to fight him. The doctors used words that sounded clinical and precise, but meant only one thing: too late. If they had caught it 6 months earlier, the survival rate would have been 70%. Now it was below 10. Diane fought anyway because that is who she was. 8 weeks of treatment that consumed their savings, drained their retirement accounts, maxed their credit, and mortgaged their home beyond recovery. 8 weeks that ended in a hospital room and marched Diane's hand in Nathan's, her eyes on their daughter. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the same steel it always had. "Don't let anyone blame you," she said to Nathan. "This is my fault. I was stubborn." Then she looked at Lily. "You're more like your father than you think. Hold on to that." Then she was gone and the world rearranged itself around her absence, and nothing fit the way it was supposed to anymore. The funeral was held at the small Presbyterian church where Nathan and Diane had married. Harold Whitfield, Diane's father, waited until the casket was lowered into the ground before he turned to Nathan and delivered his verdict. He did not lower his voice because he wanted everyone to hear. Harold was 76, a retired attorney with the posture of a fence post, in the eyes of a man who had spent his entire life judging others and finding them insufficient. If you had made her see a doctor sooner, if you had paid attention, if you had been a better husband. He paused, not from emotion but for effect, the way lawyers pause when they want each word to land like a stone. My daughter would still be alive. Eleanor Whitfield stood beside her husband. She said nothing. Her face was marble. Her silence was his own verdict, and in some ways it was crueler than Harold's words, because at least words can be argued with. Silence simply hangs in the air and dares you to fill it. Nathan tried to explain. His voice shook, not from fear, but from the effort of keeping grief and rage in separate rooms. Diane refused to go. I begged her. You know what she was like, Harold. No one could make her do something she didn't want to do. But Harold Whitfield did not want explanations. Harold Whitfield wanted an enemy. Someone specific, someone present, someone he could look at and say, "This is the reason my daughter is dead." Nathan was standing right in front of him. After the funeral, the losses continued to stack like bricks on Nathan's chest. The medical bills totaled over $280,000, most of it not covered by insurance. He had spent everything. The software company where he had worked for 14 years restructured his department, which was the polite way of saying they fired the man who had missed too much work in the past 8 months, tending to his dying wife. The bank sent foreclosure notices. Deputies came on a Tuesday afternoon to supervise the eviction, treating the collapse of a family's life as routine paperwork. Nathan swallowed his pride and called Harold. The words tasted like metal in his mouth. "We have nowhere to go, just temporarily, Harold, until I find work and get back on my feet." Silence on the line. Long silence. Then Harold's voice, cold and deliberate. "Lily is welcome. My granddaughter always has a place here, but you know, I will not shelter the man who killed my daughter through neglect." Lily heard the call on speakerphone. She crossed the room, took the phone from her father's hand, and spoke to her grandfather in a voice that Nathan recognized with a pang so sharp it nearly broke him. It was Diane's voice. The same quiet steel, the same absolute certainty. "I'm going with Dad. If you can't accept him, you don't need to accept me either." She hung up. No negotiation, no second chances, no looking back. That was the moment Lily chose sides, and the cost was everything she had left of her mother's family. The Christmas dinners, the birthday calls, the grandmother who had taught her to bake and told her stories at bedtime. All of it severed with a single sentence because Lily Cole loved her father more than she loved comfort, and she would not stand in the same room with people who called him a killer. 2 weeks in a cheap motel on Route 9, watching the last of their money bleed away. Then the lawyer's letter arrived. Nathan was the sole legal heir to the property of Walter Cole, located in Ridgewood, Connecticut. Not a miracle, but a rope thrown to a drowning man. They pushed through the front door to gather Nathan, using his shoulder against wood that had swollen and warped beyond the reach of any handle. The scraping sound sent birds scattering from the rafters. Inside, the smell struck them like a physical thing. Decades of accumulated dust, mildew, rotting wood, and something else. Something Nathan could only describe as the smell of time standing still. Lily pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The electricity had been disconnected years ago. Sunlight leaked through gaps in the boarded windows, casting strange geometric patterns across a living room frozen in 1995. Furniture sat under stained drop cloths, their shapes ghostly and uncertain. Wallpaper hung in strips. The ceiling was mapped with brown water stains. The kitchen was worse. Cabinets hanging open, rust and mouse droppings, the sink pulled away from the wall, linoleum buckled and cracked. But the bones of the house were good. It had been built in an era when craftsmen took pride in their work, and the framing held solid beneath the decay. "We can make this work," Nathan said. "It'll take time and money," Lily answered. "Both things we don't have." "I've still got tools in the truck." She looked at him sideways. "Dad, you're a software engineer. When's the last time you replaced a window?" 20 years ago doesn't mean I forgot." Then he added, and the bitterness in his voice was sharper than he intended. "Besides, I've got time now, plenty of time." The wince on Lily's face made him regret it immediately. She had lost her mother too. She had lost her home, her stability, her grandparents, her sense that the world was a place where things made sense. And she had stayed. She had chosen him over comfort, loyalty over safety, and she was standing right here in this rotting house with a flashlight in a canvas bag and not a single word of complaint. Nathan opened his mouth to apologize, but Lily squeezed his arm and said quietly, "We're going to be okay, Dad. We'll fix this place up. You will find work. Things will get better." He wanted to believe her more than he had ever wanted anything. That first evening, they laid out sleeping bags on the living room floor, swept clear of the worst debris. Battery-powered lanterns threw warm circles on the cracked walls. Gas station sandwiches. Neither of them particularly hungry. "Tell me about him," Lily said after a long silence. "Great-Grandpa Walter. I don't really remember him." Nathan leaned back against the wall and watched shadows move on the ceiling. He was quiet, thoughtful, traveled a lot for work. He restored old paintings, authenticated pieces for collectors and museums. He knew art better than anyone I've ever met. He paused, remembering. He smelled like linseed oil and turpentine. Always, even on Sundays. Did he ever talk about his work? Sometimes he would tell me about finding a hidden signature under centuries of varnish or identifying a painting that had been mislabeled for generations. He loved the detective work, said every painting had a story and his job was to help tell it. Why did he let this place fall apart? Nathan had wondered the same thing for years. After your great-grandmother died, he traveled even more. Maybe he couldn't stand being here without her. Maybe he just got old and tired and ran out of fight. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, and her voice carried the weight of something much larger than the question, "Is that what happens? You just run out of fight?" Nathan heard what she was really asking. She was not asking about Walter Cole. She was asking about her father, about the man she had watched diminish week by week under the weight of grief and debt and humiliation. And she needed to know if there was a floor to the falling or if it just went on forever. "No," he said, and he meant it. "You choose to keep fighting, even when it's hard, even when you don't know if it'll matter." She nodded, satisfied. They talked a while longer about Diane crying, some laughing once or twice at memories that surfaced like bubbles from deep water. Eventually, exhaustion won. Lily's breathing deepened into sleep. Nathan lay awake watching stars through the gaps in the boarded windows, listening to the old house settle around him, creaking and groaning as though it was remembering how to breathe with people inside it again. 2 weeks of labor blurred together. Nathan worked with an intensity that bordered on obsession, swinging hammers, prying boards, hauling debris. His hands blistered, cracked, bled, and calloused. His back ached in places he did not know backs could ache. But the pain was useful because pain occupied the same space in his mind that grief wanted to fill, and as long as he was hurting physically, he could keep the other kind of hurting at a manageable distance. Lily divided her time between helping with the repairs and keeping her freelance design business alive from a makeshift office in Walter's old study. Her laptop was their only lifeline to income, generating just enough to buy materials and keep food on the table. Medical bills arrived weekly, each envelope a small detonation. Progress came slowly. The roof stopped leaking. Windows were replaced with salvaged panes from a demolition yard. The kitchen sink worked again. Francine Baker, a neighbor of 68 who lived a quarter-mile down the road, appeared one morning with a pot of stew and memories of Walter. "Your grandfather was a good man," she told Nathan. "Helped my late husband with legal paperwork for free. Never asked anything in return. He lived quiet, but he lived with purpose. During those 2 weeks while Nathan was outside wrestling with roof shingles and plumbing, Lily was doing something she had not told her father about. She was calling her grandmother Eleanor. Not often. Brief calls late at night when Nathan was too exhausted to notice. Lily missed her grandmother. Missed the Christmas cookies, the bedtime stories, the soft voice on the phone. She could not accept that all of it was gone. 24 years old, motherless. Living in a condemned house, and she just wanted to hear her grandmother's voice say something kind. Eleanor answered each time. Her tone was softer than Harold's always. She asked about Lily's health, her work, whether she was eating enough. She never mentioned Nathan directly, and in one of these calls, Lily, exhausted and aching for connection, mentioned that they were fixing up great-grandpa Walter's old house and had found all sorts of interesting things. She said nothing specific. The hidden chamber had not been discovered yet, but the seed of information was planted, and seeds have a way of growing in directions no one intends. On a Thursday afternoon in early September, Nathan was in the basement prying up rotted floorboards for replacement. The space was dark and damp, smelling of earth and decaying in the particular kind of neglect that only decades can produce. He had been putting off this work because he knew it would be the worst of everything down here, but it could not wait any longer. The board he was working on resisted. Nails rusted deep into the joist beneath, refusing to release their grip. He repositioned his pry bar, applied more pressure, heard the wood crack along the grain. The board came free suddenly, and Nathan stumbled backward, catching himself against the cinder block wall, the pry bar clattering to the floor. When he looked down at the space where the board had been, he saw something that did not belong. Metal, dark iron covered in rust and grime, but unmistakably shaped by human hands. He knelt closer, wiping away dirt and debris. The metal formed a square roughly 3 feet on each side, set perfectly flush with the concrete foundation. Not a patch, not a utility cover. A door. A trap door, heavy and industrial, the kind built to endure. And in its center, barely visible beneath decades of accumulated filth, was a combination lock with 4 rotating dials. Lily, his voice bounced off the basement walls. Lily, come down here. Her footsteps crossed the floor above him, then descended the stairs. She crouched beside him, her phone's flashlight revealing the full shape of the discovery. They cleared the remaining boards in silence, exposing the entire trapdoor. The iron was heavy gauge, built by someone who intended it to last longer than themselves. The combination lock was old, but the mechanism appeared intact beneath its layer of oxidation. Why would great-grandpa Walter have this? Lily whispered. I don't know. And why hide it? Why lock it? Nathan did not have answers. He tried the lock, spinning the dials at random. Nothing. They needed the combination. They searched the house systematically. It was in the bottom drawer of Walter's desk, wedged beneath a stack of yellowed newspapers, that Lily found the leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked and faded soft with age. Nathan opened it carefully and recognized the handwriting immediately. Walter's penmanship, neat, precise, the script of a man who had spent his life measuring the world in millimeters. Most entries were brief, cryptic references that meant nothing to Nathan. Provenance verified on the landscape, documentation complete. Met with the estate attorney, terms acceptable. The collection grows, so does the responsibility. Near the middle of the journal, Nathan found a passage that stopped his breathing. Some things are worth more than money. Some things must be protected at all costs. I have spent my life acquiring pieces that would have been lost or destroyed, preserving them for a future I will not see. This is not treasure. This is a sacred trust. And whoever inherits this burden must understand that there are people who will do anything to claim what is below. People who believe ownership matters more than stewardship. They are wrong. They have always been wrong. Several blank pages later, a sequence of numbers. 7392. They returned to the basement as the last daylight faded from the windows above. Nathan knelt beside the trapdoor, the journal open at his side. His hands trembled as he dialed the combination. 7392. He pulled the lock. Nothing. Still is secured. Try it backward, Lily said. 2937. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed louder than it was, a small mechanical snap that echoed through the basement and through Nathan's chest and through the rest of his life. They stared at each other in the lantern light, 2 people balanced on the edge of something enormous. Should we? Lily whispered. Nathan thought about the medical bills on the kitchen counter upstairs. The in-laws who had thrown them away like garbage. His grandfather, who had spent an entire lifetime protecting something so important, he had built a hidden vault beneath his own house and never told a soul. "We open it," Nathan said. The trapdoor was heavier than either of them expected. The hinges screamed as they pulled rust and resistance, fighting every inch until the iron slab fell back against the floor with a deep reverberating boom that shook dust from the ceiling above and sent it drifting down like snow. Below was darkness. Stone steps descended into nothing. Cool, dry air rose from the opening, carrying a scent Nathan could not immediately place. Old paper, canvas, something faintly chemical but not unpleasant, the smell of preservation. The smell of things kept safe from time. He picked up the lantern and took the first step down, then another. 15 steps before his feet touched solid ground. The chamber opened around him as Lily's flashlight joined his lantern, and what they saw stopped them both in their tracks. The room was enormous. Larger than the basement above, extending beyond the footprint of the house. Concrete walls reinforced. A ventilation system that still functioned, keeping the air dry and stable. And everywhere in every direction arranged with meticulous care, wooden crates stacked along the walls, each labeled with codes. Large shapes draped in heavy canvas. Metal filing cabinets showing no trace of rust. Wooden frames leaning in careful rows against the far wall, wrapped in protective material. Nathan opened the nearest crate. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a painting, small perhaps 12 inches by 16. A young woman in Renaissance clothing, her expression serene, her eyes following the viewer with the uncanny quality that only masterworks possess. The colors were vivid despite obvious age. The crackle pattern in the varnish spoke of centuries. They opened crate after crate, marble sculptures, bronze figures, ceramics with glazes that caught the light like water. Manuscripts in languages Nathan could not read, their pages covered in calligraphy and gilded decorations, so fine it seemed impossible that human hands had produced it. Every single piece was perfectly packed, perfectly preserved, protected from deterioration, with the obsessive care of someone who understood exactly what they were guarding. The filing cabinets held folders for each piece, provenance records, authentication notes, photographs. Walter had documented everything with the precision of a scholar and the devotion of a guardian. Nathan pulled a file at random and read his grandfather's handwriting. Recovered from the Ashworth estate sale, 1967, family unaware of true significance. Renaissance bronze circa 1520, attributed to the workshop of Cellini. Authenticated through comparative analysis with known works. Another file, salvaged from demolition site, Philadelphia, 1974. Building scheduled for destruction. Contents to be discarded. Ming Dynasty vase, early 15th century. Provenance traced to the Whitmore collection, thought lost in 1892 fire. There was a folder thicker than the rest labeled simply History. Nathan opened it and read aloud, his voice small in the vastness of the chamber. I began this collection not from greed, but from necessity. Too many important works were being lost, sold to private collectors who locked them away, destroyed by families who did not understand their value, scattered to the winds through estate sales and bankruptcies. I saw it happening again and again in my work as a restorer. Beautiful, historically significant pieces simply disappearing. So I began to save what I could. Nathan closed the folder. The lantern threw their shadows long against the concrete walls. Above them, through 15 feet of stone and earth and the rotting floorboards of a house that was falling apart, the sky was darkening over rural Connecticut. Somewhere in the distance, crickets were beginning to sing. Somewhere closer, in a comfortable home, in a respectable neighborhood, Harold and Eleanor Whitfield were probably sitting down to dinner, satisfied that they had punished the man they blamed for their daughter's death. They had no idea what Nathan had just found beneath the crumbling house they had helped push him into. No idea that their cruelty had led him directly to a fortune waiting in the dark. Nathan and Lily covered everything, carefully returned items to their crates, made sure the chamber looked undisturbed. They climbed back up the stone steps and lowered the trapdoor, hearing the solid thunk of iron settling into place. The lock clicked shut. Above them, the house creaked in the evening wind. We need help, Lily said. Someone who can tell us what we're actually dealing with. Nathan nodded. He was thinking of Miles Thornton, an old friend, a professor of art history at Columbia. If anyone could evaluate what lay beneath this house, it was Miles. But we tell him only what he needs to know, show him a few pieces, get his expert opinion, nothing more. Outside, the Connecticut night was quiet in a way that should have felt peaceful, but instead felt like the world was holding its breath. And neither father nor daughter noticed the faint glint of light from the road, where something reflective, a windshield perhaps, or a camera lens caught the last of the fading sky before the darkness swallowed it entirely. Dr. Miles Thornton arrived 3 days later in a modest sedan that looked as out of place on the overgrown driveway as a library book on a battlefield. He emerged carrying a leather messenger bag and wearing the same slightly rumpled blazer Nathan remembered from 15 years of friendship, though the beard was new and thoroughly gray, and the lines around his eyes had deepened into the kind of grooves that academia carves into men who care too much about things most people never think about. They embraced briefly on the porch the awkward half-hug of men who have let too much time pass between conversations. Miles looked at the house, then at Nathan, and whatever he saw in his friend's face made him skip the small talk entirely. "Your message sounded like you needed a friend," Miles said. "I do, but I also need an expert." Lily had cleaned the study as best she could, setting up folding chairs around a card table, coffee brewed on the camping stove, filling the room with the only warmth the house had known in 30 years. Nathan told the story from the beginning. Diane's illness, the medical bills, the foreclosure, the Whitfields turning their backs, the house. He watched Miles absorb each blow with the quiet attention of a man accustomed to listening for what matters beneath the surface of things. He saved the basement for last. "You're telling me your grandfather kept a hidden art collection," Miles said, setting down his coffee cup with exaggerated care. "Under this house. For decades. I need you to look at it. Tell me what we're dealing with." The descent into the chamber felt different with a third person present. When Miles reached the bottom of the stone steps and raised his lantern and saw the scope of what Walter Cole had built beneath the Connecticut earth, he drew a breath so sharp it sounded like something tearing. He stood motionless for a long time, the lantern trembling in his hand, his eyes moving across the crates and the draped shapes and the filing cabinets and the wrapped frames, and Nathan knew from the look on his friend's face that his instincts had been right. This was extraordinary. Nathan had selected 3 pieces: the Renaissance portrait from the first crate, a small bronze sculpture, and the largest painting still draped in canvas waiting. Miles examined the portrait first, pulling a jeweler's loupe from his bag and bending close to the surface under the harsh white light of a battery-powered work lamp. Minutes passed in absolute silence. He moved the loupe across the canvas with the slow deliberation of a surgeon studying brushwork, examining pigment layers, tracing the pattern of cracks in the varnish that spoke of age and authenticity in a language only experts could read. "The technique is right," Miles murmured, more to himself than to them. "Crackalure pattern is consistent with age. The pigments." He produced what looked like a small spectrometer, taking readings that meant nothing to Nathan but clearly meant a great deal to Miles. "This is either genuine or the finest forgery I have ever encountered in my life. And if it's genuine, you're holding something worth 6 figures, maybe considerably more." The bronze received similar scrutiny: photographs from multiple angles, measurements of proportions, examination of casting marks invisible to Nathan's untrained eye. When Miles finally looked up, his expression had shifted from academic curiosity to something closer to reverence. "Renaissance workshop production. I would need laboratory analysis to confirm, but the quality suggests a master's direct involvement. Not a student piece, not a copy." He looked at Nathan with new eyes. "Where did your grandfather get these?" "The files say estate sales, demolition sites, places where valuable things were being overlooked or thrown away." Nathan handed over one of Walter's provenance folders. He documented everything. Miles read through the papers with fingers that had begun to tremble. "This is meticulous, professional-grade research. Your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing." He closed the folder slowly. "Nathan, if even half of what's down here is authentic, you're sitting on a collection worth millions. Possibly tens of millions." The number floated in the air between them, too large to land anywhere real. "One more," Nathan said. "The big one." They pulled the canvas covering away together, and Miles went completely still. The painting was massive, perhaps 6 feet by 8, a classical scene, populated by dozens of figures arranged within architectural spaces that seemed to recede into infinite depth. The colors glowed under the work lights with an intensity that seemed to come from within the canvas itself, reds and blues and golds radiating a luminescence that had survived centuries of darkness. It was the kind of painting that made the air around it feel different, heavier, somehow charged with the accumulated weight of all the eyes that had ever looked upon it in all the years it had endured. Miles did not move for a very long time. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Then he fumbled for his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be an academic database, his face losing color with each swipe until he was pale enough that Nathan considered reaching for him in case he fell. Nathan, his voice was hoarse. Do you know what the Kensington collection was? No. 1952, the largest private art collection in America. The Kensington family estate in Hudson Valley burned to the ground. Everyone inside died. The entire collection was presumed destroyed. Insurance companies paid out over $50 million, worth 10 times that in today's money. Miles's hand shook as he pointed at the painting. This matches the description of their centerpiece, a work attributed to the school of Varazzi, possibly by the master himself. It was documented in their catalog, photographed once in black and white in 1948. He showed Nathan his phone, a grainy photograph from an old auction house catalog. Even in that degraded image, the composition was unmistakable. The same architectural spaces, the same arrangement of figures, the same impossible depth. This painting was thought destroyed in the fire, Miles said. If it's authentic, if this is actually the Kensington piece, he stopped, swallowed, started again. Nathan, this single painting could be worth $500 million. The silence that followed had weight, physical, measurable weight pressing down on Nathan's shoulders and settling into his bones. Lily had sat down on one of the crates, her face blank with the particular kind of shock that comes when reality bends so far from expectation that the mind simply refuses to process it. Nathan felt the chamber tilt around him, the walls seeming to lean inward, the air suddenly insufficient. That's insane, he heard himself say. A painting can't be worth that much. This one can. It's not just the artistic merit, though, that alone would make it priceless. It's the provenance, the history, the fact that it was presumed lost for over 70 years. Do you understand what this means? This changes everything we thought we knew about the Kensington fire. The insurance companies, Lily said quietly from her crate. Both men turned to look at her. If the painting wasn't destroyed, if it survived, wouldn't they want it back or want to be compensated? Miles nodded slowly. That's one complication. There would also be questions about the Kensington heirs, about legal ownership, about how your great-grandfather came to possess it. His voice dropped. This isn't just valuable, Nathan. This is complicated, dangerous even. Miles left that evening with promises to research discreetly, to reach out only to colleagues he trusted absolutely. Nathan watched his friend's taillights disappear down the dark road and felt unease settle over him like a second skin. Something about the way Miles had looked at that painting, the hunger in his eyes that he probably didn't even know was showing, reminded Nathan of his grandfather's warning. People who will do anything to claim what is below. What Nathan did not know, what he would not learn until the damage was done, was that Miles Thornton's discretion had a weakness, and that weakness had a name. 3 days after his visit to the house, Miles attended an art history symposium at a hotel in Manhattan. He drank more than he should have. The excitement of the discovery was a living thing inside him, pressing against his ribs, demanding release. Over a third glass of wine in conversation with a colleague he considered trustworthy, Miles mentioned a remarkable find in Connecticut, something connected to the Kensington collection. He did not say where exactly or what exactly, but he said enough. And the colleague he was speaking with sat on the advisory board of a real estate development company controlled by a family named Pemberton. The information traveled fast. Information like that always does. Nathan found the letter 2 days after Miles's visit. It was taped to the back of the bottom drawer in the filing cabinet, sealed in a plastic sleeve, his name written on the front in Walter's careful hand. Below his name in smaller letters, open only if they come for it. The letter was dated 1998, 17 years before Walter's death. Nathan read it 3 times in the dim light of the chamber, each pass revealing new layers of a burden he was only beginning to understand. Walter had been hired in 1952 to restore paintings at the Kensington estate. He arrived 3 days after the fire, expecting devastation and finding it. The main house was ash and rubble. The family was dead. Catherine Kensington, her husband, 2 household staff, including a woman named Alice Sinclair, all gone. But Walter had found the collection vault beneath the estate, fireproof, intact. Everything the Kensington family had spent generations acquiring, preserved in a space designed specifically to survive catastrophe. And standing in that vault beside Walter was the family's attorney, a man named Edmund Pemberton. Edmund Pemberton wanted to declare the collection destroyed, split the insurance payout, sell the surviving pieces gradually through private channels over the coming decades. A fortune built on ash and fraud and the murder of an entire family because Walter was certain, absolutely certain, that the fire had not been accidental. Edmund gave Walter a choice: participate in the theft and share the profits, or face consequences that Edmund described with the casual specificity of a man who had arranged consequences before. Walter refused. That night, he returned to the vault alone and began removing the collection piece by piece. It took 3 weeks. He documented every item with the precision that defined his life. He built the chamber beneath his own house. He hid everything and told no one. Not to steal, never that, but to protect what thieves would have scattered to the wind. The letter ended with a warning that made Nathan's hands go cold. The Pemberton family has never stopped searching for this collection. Edmund died in 1989, but his grandson Garrett continues the hunt. They are dangerous, Nathan. Ruthless. If they learn you have what they have been seeking, they will not stop until they take it. Be careful. Trust no one completely. And if you can find a way to return the collection to its rightful place, to the museums, the public, the world, then you will have accomplished what I could not. Nathan climbed out of the chamber on legs that felt borrowed from someone else. Lily was making dinner on the camping stove, the ordinary domesticity of the scene so jarring against what he had just read that for a moment the two realities could not coexist in his mind. He showed her the letter and watched the color drain from her face. Dad, this is serious. If these people are as powerful as great-grandpa Walter said. I know. Before he could say more, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered with the caution of a man who has just learned that caution is the price of survival. Mr. Cole? A woman's voice, professional but warm. My name is Rachel Sinclair. I'm a researcher, and I know exactly what you found in your basement. My grandmother died in that fire. I've spent 20 years looking for the truth. A pause that carried the weight of decades. We can help each other. She hung up before Nathan could respond. He stood in the kitchen, holding his phone, staring at the screen, feeling the walls of his quiet, desperate life contract around him like the closing of a fist. He met Rachel the next morning at a coffee shop called Morning Grounds in the center of town. She was younger than he expected, late 40s, with practical clothes and a worn leather satchel, and the focused intensity of someone who had organized her entire life around a single unanswered question. She laid out 20 years of research on the table between their coffee cups. FBI documents obtained through Freedom of Information requests, newspaper clippings, testimony from former Pemberton employees. The picture that emerged was devastating. A family that had built an empire on murder and fraud, led now by Garrett Pemberton, 71 years old, a billionaire in commercial real estate whose fortune traced directly back to stolen art and insurance money. The sedan outside your house, Rachel said. Dark blue tinted windows. Pemberton's private investigators. They've been monitoring that property for years, waiting for something to happen. Your arrival triggered their interest. Your friend's visit confirmed their suspicions. Rachel told him something else, something that landed harder than any of Ed. Activity around your house spiked dramatically in the last 48 hours. Someone talked Mr. Cole. Someone who knows something about what you found. Nathan went home and did something he would regret. Driven by fear and the desperate math of a father calculating threats to his child, he checked Lily's phone. He found the call history. Eleanor Whitfield. Multiple calls over several weeks. And in a rush of understanding that felt like falling, he knew exactly what had happened. The confrontation that followed was one of the most painful moments of Nathan Cole's life. Not because of anger, though anger was there burning in his chest like something swallowed too fast, but because the person who had inadvertently betrayed them was his daughter, and she had done it out of love, out of the simple human need to hold on to family, and the look on her face when she understood what she had caused was something Nathan would carry with him for the rest of his days. "You called Grandma Eleanor." "I missed her, Dad. I just wanted to keep in touch. I didn't say anything specific." "You didn't need to say anything specific. Just enough for them to know there was something valuable here. And now Harold knows, and the Pembertons know." Lily's face went white. The guilt hit her visibly, a physical thing that bent her posture and dimmed her eyes because she was 24 years old and she had lost her mother and she had only wanted to hear her grandmother's voice, and that small act of longing had opened a door that could not be closed. 2 nights later, the door opened literally. Nathan woke at 2 in the morning to sounds at the back of the house. Not random sounds, deliberate sounds, professional sounds. The careful, methodical work of someone who knew how to defeat a lock. He grabbed the old baseball bat he had found in Walter's closet and moved through the dark house toward the kitchen. Through the gap in the back door, he saw 2 figures in dark clothing, one working the deadbolt with specialized tools. Lily appeared behind him, phone already in her hand, 911 already dialed. When the distant wail of sirens reached the property, the figures vanished into the tree line like smoke. The police came, took a report, promised increased patrols. Meaningless words on a road this isolated. After they left, Lily sat at the kitchen table and cried not from fear, but from the crushing weight of responsibility, the knowledge that this had happened because of her. Nathan held her, but could not find words because there were no words adequate to the situation. That night, after Lily finally slept, Nathan descended into the chamber alone. He sat on a crate in the center of Walter's collection, surrounded by centuries of human achievement, holding his grandfather's letter in one hand and his phone in the other. And for the first time since this began, he seriously considered surrender. The logic was simple, cold and terrible and simple. If he contacted Pemberton, if he negotiated, if he returned some portion of the collection in exchange for safety, Lily would be protected. The threats would stop. They could walk away damaged, but alive. His grandfather had chosen principle over safety and died alone in a falling down house without ever seeing justice. Was that really the legacy Nathan wanted to continue? Was principle worth his daughter's life? He searched for the number. Pemberton Realty, corporate headquarters. His thumb hovered over the call button, then pressed it. The phone rang once. And in that single ring, Nathan looked down at his screen and saw Diane's face looking back at him from the wallpaper photo. He had never changed her smile. Her eyes, the absolute certainty in her expression that seemed to say, "I married a man who does the right thing even when it costs him everything. Don't you dare prove me wrong now." He ended the call. 4 seconds. But 4 seconds was close enough to feel the gravity of the other choice, the easier choice, pulling at him like deep water. Lily found him in the chamber the next morning. She looked at his phone, saw the outgoing call to Pemberton Realty, 3:47 a.m. duration, 4 seconds. She understood instantly. You were going to call them. Not a question. Nathan did not insult her by denying it. I was scared, for you. Don't be scared for me. Her voice was steady now, steadier than his, carrying an authority that did not come from age or experience, but from something deeper, something inherited. I'm not a child. Mom didn't raise me to quit, and Mom didn't marry you because you were a man who quits. She knelt beside him, put her hand on his arm, the way Diane used to, with that same firm, gentle pressure that meant I am here, and I am not leaving, and you are going to Ted, okay. Mom always said you chose the hard right over the easy wrong. That's who she fell in love with. Don't let fear turn you into someone else. Nathan looked at his daughter in the lantern light. 24 years old, her mother's eyes, her mother's steel. And he made the decision that would define the rest of his life. No deal, no surrender. They would fight. The Pemberton response came within days. Garrett Pemberton, acting through his son Marcus, a 38-year-old attorney, with his grandfather's ruthlessness and a modern sophistication that made him more dangerous, filed a lawsuit claiming that Walter Cole had stolen Pemberton family property in 1952. The documents were fabricated but expertly so notarized and filed with the authority of people who had been manufacturing lies for 7 decades. The local newspaper ran the headline, "Businesses in town suddenly declined Nathan's credit." Lily received threatening emails. Marcus Pemberton called Nathan directly, his voice smooth and cordial, and carrying the unmistakable undertone of a man delivering a threat he fully intends to follow through on. "We can resolve this like civilized people, Mr. Cole, or we can destroy your life completely. The choice is yours." Nathan chose neither. He chose Sylvia Hartwell. The attorney arrived 2 days later, a woman in her mid-50s with steel gray hair, in the courtroom bearing of someone who had spent decades fighting people richer and more powerful than herself, and winning often enough to develop a taste for it. She reviewed Walter's documentation for a full hour without speaking, then looked up and said 4 words that changed the shape of everything. "Your grandfather was brilliant," she explained. The provenance records, the authentication files, the meticulous chain of custody Walter had maintained for 40 years. It was not merely a collection. It was a legal case already built, already documented, waiting for someone to walk it through a courtroom door. Around them, the machinery of resistance assembled. Rachel brought her 20 years of investigation. Miles returned chastened by the knowledge that his carelessness had caused harm, carrying authentication reports from colleagues who had staked their reputations as on the collection's genuineness. Lily built encrypted digital backups of everything, channeling her guilt into action, transforming the mistakes she had made into the meticulous security that might save them. Francine Baker rallied the town. Food appeared on the porch. A local contractor showed up with tools and offered his labor for free. Notes of encouragement were slipped under the door from people Nathan had never met, who remembered Walter Cole as the quiet man who helped his neighbors without ever asking for anything in return. Sylvia filed the counterclaim. The hearing was set for a Monday in late October, the weekend before Nathan barely slept. He paced the house at night, rehearsed his testimony until his voice gave out, read and reread Walter's journals, looking for strength in the words of a man who had carried this burden alone for 4 decades. On Sunday evening, he found himself in the chamber one last time, standing before the masterpiece that glowed in the lantern light like something alive. "I hope I'm doing right by you," he said to the empty air, to Walter, to Diane, to everyone he had ever loved and lost. Lily found him there, sat beside him on a crate, leaned her head against his shoulder the way she used to when she was small enough to believe her father could fix anything. "Mom would be proud of you," she said quietly. "I miss her." "I know, me too. But we're still here, Dad. We're still fighting. That matters." Nathan slept without dreams for the first time in months. When dawn came, he dressed in the one suit he had salvaged from the foreclosure, the same suit he had worn to Diane's funeral. It seemed right that both occasions should share the same fabric. Both were about honoring the dead by choosing to live with integrity. They drove to the courthouse together. Nathan, Lily, Sylvia, Rachel, Miles. 5 people in 2 cars against a family that had spent 70 years building an empire on lies. The math was absurd, but Nathan had learned something in these past months, something Walter had tried to teach him from beyond the grave. The size of the fight does not determine its outcome. What matters is whether the people fighting believe in what they are fighting for. And Nathan Cole, standing on the courthouse steps in his funeral suit, with his daughter beside him, believed. The doors opened. The battle began. The courtroom smelled like old wood and floor polish, and the particular kind of tension that accumulates in a room designed for the dispensation of justice. Nathan sat at the defendant's table with Lily on his left and Sylvia on his right, his hands folded in front of him, because if he did not fold them, they would shake, and he did not want the 6 attorneys sitting across the aisle to see a trembling man. He wanted them to see a man who had come to finish what his grandfather started. The Pemberton legal team occupied the opposite table like an occupying army. 6 attorneys in suits that cost more than Nathan's truck, arranged in a formation that radiated wealth and confidence, and the particular brand of arrogance that comes from decades of never losing. At the center sat James Buchanan, silver-haired, smooth, voiced the kind of lawyer who had won so many cases that doubt had become a foreign language to him. Behind the attorneys in the first row of the gallery sat Garrett Pemberton himself. 71 years old, thin and upright, with eyes that swept the courtroom with the proprietary gaze of a man who believed that money entitled him to outcomes. Nathan was studying those eyes when he saw something that drove the air from his lungs. Harold Whitfield was sitting beside Garrett Pemberton. His former father-in-law wore a dark suit and a satisfied expression, the look of a man who has been proven right about something he always suspected. He caught Nathan's gaze across the courtroom and held it, and in that small, cruel smile, Nathan saw the full depth of the betrayal. This was not a grieving father who had lashed out in pain. This was a man who had made a calculated decision, who had chosen sides long before Diane's death gave him an excuse to reveal it. Lily's hand found Nathan's arm and gripped hard. "What is he doing here?" Before Nathan could answer, Harold rose and crossed the aisle with the measured stride of a man approaching a podium. "Nathan, I tried to warn you. The Pembertons deserve what you're hiding. I've told them everything I learned from Diane over the years, everything about your grandfather's house." He leaned closer, dropping his voice to the register menus when they want their words to feel like knives. "You can't win this. You never could. And this time you'll drag Lily down with you." Sylvia stepped between them with the fluid precision of someone accustomed to interposing herself between power and its targets. "Mr. Whitfield, step back. Now." Lily tugged Nathan's arm. Her voice was quiet but carried the same steel that had sustained them through every crisis of the past months. "Let's go, Dad. He's not worth it." They moved toward the courtroom doors, leaving Harold standing in the aisle. But Nathan's confidence had cracked. The knowledge that his own father-in-law had been working with the Pembertons perhaps for years, perhaps since before Diane's death, was a wound that cut in directions he had not anticipated. He sat down at the defendant's table and forced himself to breathe. Judge Miriam Holloway entered the courtroom with the deliberate gravity of someone who understood the weight of what was about to unfold. She was perhaps 60, with reading glasses perched on her nose, and an expression that suggested she had seen enough of human nature to be unsurprised by its failures, but not yet so much that she had stopped being offended by them. She took her seat. The gavel fell. The room went silent. Buchanan rose first. He moved through the space between the tables like a man who owned it, his voice warm and reasonable and utterly convincing. "If you did not know that every word was built on 70 years of fabrication." He painted Walter Cole as a thief who had exploited a tragedy. He painted Nathan as a desperate man willing to profit from stolen property. He presented the forged documents with the practiced confidence of someone who had been presenting forged documents his entire career. Each page notarized, each signature witnessed, each lie wrapped in enough official paper to make it look like truth. When Buchanan sat down, Sylvia stood. She was shorter than him, less polished. Her suit was not tailored, and her hair was pulled back with a simplicity that bordered on indifference. But when she spoke, the courtroom leaned forward as though pulled by a force none of them could name. "Your Honor, this case is not about a contract dispute. It is about the systematic theft of one of America's greatest art collections and the murder of the family who owned it." The courtroom erupted. Buchanan was on his feet objecting. The gavel cracked like a gunshot once, twice, until silence returned. Counselor Judge Holloway said, her voice carrying the particular sharpness that judges reserve for moments when the stakes have just been raised beyond what anyone expected. "That is a serious accusation. I can substantiate every word of it, Your Honor." For the next 2 hours, Sylvia Hartwell did exactly that. She dismantled the Pemberton case with the methodical precision of someone disassembling a machine to show the world that every gear inside it was counterfeit. She presented the original Kensington will, authenticated by handwriting experts who had staked their careers on its genuineness. She demonstrated that the Pemberton documents contained anachronisms, references to statutes that did not exist in 1952, signatures from individuals who were provably in other states on the dates indicated. She showed the court Walter Cole's 40 years of documentation, each piece cataloged, each provenance chain, verified, each authentication supported by evidence that would have satisfied any museum in the world. Miles Thornton took the stand and testified with the careful precision of a man who knew his credibility was the foundation upon which this entire case would be built or broken. He described each piece he had examined, the methods he had used, the conclusions he had reached. His voice did not waver. His eyes did not flinch from Buchanan's cross-examination. Whatever guilt he carried for his earlier indiscretion, he was paying it back now in the only currency a scholar possesses: the truth. Rachel Sinclair testified about her grandmother Alice, about the phone call the day before the fire, about the 20 years she had spent assembling evidence that the Pemberton family had built their empire on murder and insurance fraud. She presented FBI documents showing an investigation that had been quietly closed without explanation, suppressed by connections that reached into places where connections should not have been able to reach. And then during the recess, something happened to him that no one had anticipated. Lily's phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. She opened it and found photographs of documents, letters exchanged between Harold Whitfield and Garrett Pemberton, spanning several years discussing the Kensington assets and financial arrangements, in language that was careful enough to provide deniability, but specific enough to prove conspiracy. At the bottom of the message, a single line of text, "I'm sorry, I should have done this a long time ago." The message had been sent from Eleanor Whitfield's phone. Lily stared at the screen, then handed it to Sylvia without a word. The attorney's eyes sharpened as she read. This was the piece they had not known they were missing. Proof that Harold Whitfield's involvement with the Pembertons was not a recent development, born of grief and spite, but a relationship stretching back years, possibly decades, rooted in financial interest rather than family loyalty. The woman everyone had assumed was complicit in her husband's cruelty had just delivered the evidence that would expose him completely. When court reconvened, Sylvia presented Eleanor's documents. The effect was immediate and devastating. Harold Whitfield, seated in the gallery beside Garrett Pemberton, watched his own handwriting appear on the courtroom monitors, and his face underwent a transformation that Nathan would remember for the rest of his life. The confident satisfaction drained away like water from a cracked vessel, replaced by something pale and diminished, the expression of a man watching the walls he had built around his secrets collapse in real time. Garrett Pemberton turned to Harold with a look of such concentrated fury that the space between them seemed to distort, and the alliance that had brought them together cracked apart visibly, publicly, irreparably, in front of 100 witnesses and a judge who missed nothing. And then Sylvia played the recording. She had found it in Walter's files, a cassette tape dated 1989, preserved in a sealed container, alongside a signed affidavit and attesting to the circumstances of its creation. She had verified its authenticity through voice analysis. She had obtained the court's permission to play it during the evidentiary portion of the hearing. None of this Nathan knew until the moment Sylvia placed a portable cassette player on the evidence table and pressed play, and the voice of Walter Cole, dead 15 years, filled the courtroom like a ghost stepping out of the wall. The voice was clear and calm and carried a dignity that transcended the poor audio quality of a 35-year-old tape recording. Walter Cole spoke the way he had lived, with precision and care, and an unwavering commitment to the truth regardless of what it would cost him. "I found the Kensington collection in the vault beneath the estate 3 days after the fire. Edmund Pemberton was present. He proposed that we declare the collection destroyed, divide the insurance proceeds, and sell the surviving pieces through private channels over the following decades. I refused. He threatened me. He made it clear that he had the connections and the resources to destroy my career, my reputation, and my safety." The courtroom was so silent that Nathan could hear the tape hiss between Walter's sentences, the soft mechanical breathing of a machine carrying a dead man's words across time. "I removed the collection from the vault over a period of 3 weeks. I documented every piece. I preserved everything according to the highest standards of conservation. I did this not for personal gain, but to prevent a greater crime. The Kensington family's will stipulated that their collection be donated to public museums. Edmund Pemberton had that will suppressed. He fabricated documents suggesting heirs who did not exist. He built a fortune on theft, and I believe on murder." Walter's voice paused. When it resumed, there was something in it that had not been there before, a tremor that was not weakness, but rather the sound of a man placing his hand on the full weight of his conscience and finding it heavier than he expected. "I broke the law. I took property that was not mine. I accept the burden of that choice. But I will not apologize for standing between treasure and thieves. Someone had to, and if the system would not do it, then I would." The tape ended. The silence that followed was not the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of a room full of people who had just heard something that rearranged their understanding of the world. Nathan felt tears running freely down his face and did not wipe them away, because there was no shame in weeping for a man who had given everything he had to protect something beautiful and received nothing in return but loneliness and a falling down house. Judge Holloway called Nathan to the stand. He had been dreading this moment for weeks, had rehearsed answers and prepared statements and memorized facts until his head ached. But when he sat down and looked at the judge, something unexpected happened. The fear left him. Not gradually, not in stages, but all at once like a fever breaking, and in its place was a calm so complete it felt like standing in still water. "Mr. Cole," the judge said, "if I rule in your favor, what would you do with this collection?" Nathan looked at Lily, who was crying and smiling at the same time in that way that only people who have survived something together can manage. He looked at Rachel Sinclair, whose 20-year search for justice had led her to this room. He looked at the empty space where his grandfather's voice had just finished speaking. Then he looked back at the judge. "I would donate it, Your Honor, to museums, to institutions where everyone can see it and appreciate it. That's what Catherine Kensington intended. That's what my grandfather spent his life protecting. I don't want the money. I never did. I just want to finish what he started. You understand the collection is worth hundreds of millions of dollars." "Yes, ma'am. And I understand that some things are worth more than money. My grandfather taught me that. He gave his whole life to protect something beautiful and important. The least I can do is honor that sacrifice." Judge Holloway studied him for a long moment, and Nathan had the feeling of being weighed on scales that measured things no currency could buy. Then she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Cole." The ruling came after a final review of the evidence. The judge's voice was measured and deliberate, each word placed with the precision of someone constructing something intended to endure. The original Kensington will was authentic and legally binding. The Pemberton claim was based on forged documents created for the purpose of insurance fraud and theft. Walter Cole had acted to protect cultural treasures from criminals. The Pemberton lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, and the case was referred to the state attorney general for investigation into fraud and conspiracy charges. The gavel fell and Nathan Cole sat frozen in his chair while the world rearranged itself around the sound. Then Lily's arms were around him, and Sylvia was gripping his hand, and Rachel was weeping with the particular abandon of someone who has waited 2 decades for a single word and finally heard it. Justice. Garrett Pemberton rose slowly from his seat. He looked at Nathan with a hatred so pure and so concentrated that it seemed to occupy physical space, a dark radiation that crossed the courtroom like a beam of black light. Then he turned and walked out, his attorneys scrambling behind him, and the empire built on stolen art and murdered families began its long and irreversible collapse. Harold Whitfield remained in his seat, looking smaller than Nathan had ever seen him, a man diminished not by defeat, but by the public exposure of his own corruption. Nathan did not look at him again. Some betrayals close doors that can never be reopened. 3 months later, on a warm September evening, Nathan stood before the entrance to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in a suit Lily had made him buy, feeling profoundly out of place and entirely certain that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Inside, the collection had been transformed into something magnificent, an entire wing dedicated to the recovered works and the story of the man who had saved them. Walter's journals displayed behind glass. The masterpiece hanging in the central gallery, professionally restored, illuminated to reveal every brushstroke, every layer of genius that had survived 70 years of darkness. They brought Nathan to a quiet room where an elderly woman sat in a wheelchair before the small Renaissance portrait, tears streaming silently down her face. Dorothy Crawford was perhaps 90 years old with white hair and eyes that held a clarity untouched by age. She had been Catherine Kensington's personal secretary before the fire. She was the last living person who had seen the collection in its original home. She gripped Nathan's hand with surprising strength. "I waited 70 years to see these paintings again. I helped Catherine catalog them. I wrote the descriptions in her estate inventory. I thought they were gone forever." Her voice broke and rebuilt itself the way old voices do when they carry something too important to be defeated by frailty. "Your grandfather gave me back something I thought I had lost, not just the art, but proof that beauty and goodness can survive even when evil tries to destroy them." Nathan spoke to the assembled crowd that evening: museum directors, art historians, the state attorney general, journalists, ordinary people who had come because they heard a story about a man who chose honor over profit and wanted to see the evidence with their own eyes. He had prepared notes. He could not use them. Instead, he spoke from the place where words originate before the mind has time to polish them. "My grandfather, Walter Cole, was not a hero when this started. He was a working man who restored paintings for a living. But when he saw something wrong, something evil, he made a choice. Not the easy choice, not the profitable choice, the right choice. He lived with that choice for 40 years. He died without ever seeing justice done. He gave up comfort and security and even relationships to protect something he believed mattered more than personal happiness. He paused, looked at Lily in the front row, saw Diane in her face and Walter and himself and all the people they carried inside them. I didn't understand that kind of sacrifice until recently, until I lost my wife and had to decide what kind of man I wanted to be without her. My grandfather taught me even from the grave that integrity isn't about grand gestures or recognition. It's about the choices you make when no one is watching, the burdens you carry because someone has to. He looked at the masterpiece glowing on the wall behind him. Catherine Kensington wanted this collection shared with the world. Walter Cole made sure that could happen. And now finally her vision is real. Not because of wealth or power, but because one ordinary man chose honor over profit, chose to protect rather than exploit, chose the harder right over the easier wrong. 8 months after the exhibition opening, Nathan sat at Walter's desk writing the final pages of the catalog that would preserve his grandfather's work for history. Sunlight streamed through the new windows of the restored house, falling across floorboards that had been refinished to their original warmth. Lily's garden was blooming outside, flowers and vegetables pushing up through soil that had lain dormant for decades. And somewhere down the road, Francine Baker was probably cooking more stew than any single woman could eat, which meant she would be at the door by evening. The house was alive again, not just repaired, but inhabited, filled with purpose and warmth, and the kind of silence that comes not from emptiness, but from peace. The Pemberton Empire was crumbling under investigation. Harold Whitfield had been abandoned by his friends, his club, and finally his wife, who had filed for divorce and sworn she knew nothing of his dealings, a claim Nathan neither believed nor cared about enough to examine. The Smithsonian Touring Exhibition had sold out in 3 cities. Walter's story was reaching people Nathan would never meet, changing minds he would never know about, planting seeds in soil he could not see. Lily appeared in the doorway. The publisher called. Pre-orders are strong. They want to move the release date up. Whatever they think is best. Also, I got invited to speak at a design conference next month, building a business based on values instead of just profit. Nathan smiled. Your mother would be so proud of you. I learned from the best, both of you. That evening, Nathan walked the property the way he did most nights, now checking the garden, touching the walls of the house, feeling the solidity of something rebuilt. He stopped at the spot where he had stood with Lily on that first August afternoon, staring at the sagging wreck and wondering if they would survive. 9 months ago, a lifetime ago. Inside, Lily was cooking dinner, humming along to music from her phone. The scene was so beautifully ordinary that it made Nathan's chest ache with gratitude. This was what Walter had protected in his own way. Not just paintings and sculptures and manuscripts, but the possibility of this moment. Family. Home. Peace earned through principle rather than purchased with compromise. After dinner, Nathan returned to the study one final time. He stood before the framed photograph of Walter that hung on the wall. His grandfather young, standing proud before this house, when it was new, when the walls were straight and the roof was whole, and the future was a country he had not yet entered. Thank you, Nathan said simply, for trusting me, for teaching me, for showing me that some things are worth more than money, that some things must be protected at all costs. He turned off the light and climbed the stairs to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, the ordinary, beautiful, difficult business of being alive. But tonight, Nathan Cole slept peacefully in the house his grandfather had built, in the life he had reconstructed from wreckage, surrounded by love and purpose, in the quiet, deep satisfaction of a man who knows with the certainty that only comes from having been tested and not found wanting, that he did the right thing. Some things are worth more than money. Some things must be protected at all costs. Walter Cole had known this truth his entire life, and Nathan Cole, standing at last in the full light of his grandfather's legacy, had finally learned it too.